I think as I do this and I don't have my beanie hat on, I notice how much the light in the kitchen is illuminating my dome. So you didn't get this with the outdoor videos, did you? Laughing at my own jokes. So yeah, just continuing on the subject really of so leaving my previous role and sort of the challenges around that that I faced. I've talked a bit about the role of the pandemic in my my experience during the pandemic, and why the role that that had in kind of pushing me down that path of ultimately deciding to leave. Excuse me. Still not allowed to cough. I noticed I coughed on public transport the other day, and you still get some looks. It does remind me of. I remember someone saying to me during the pandemic, it used to be that you had to cough to hide a fart, and these days you have to fart to hide a cough. I think that sounds fairly appropriate. Yeah, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about change. So obviously, I mean, my original plan for leaving my role in the NHS was limited. It was I'm going to leave and be a locum, and yeah, that was kind of how bad it was. I was literally just pulling the ripcord on the parachute and going, "I'm out." Slowest parachute in the world because my notice period was 3 months. I think I ended up working 4 months in the end. But yeah, it was a bit of a kind of ripcord. I'm just going to go and I'm going to, essentially become self-employed as a doctor. I'm going to go to places. I'm going to be a locum, and I'm just going to try and plan my work-life balance around it. So, for that to actually seem like a good idea in the first place, perhaps tells you how bad I felt like my situation was. But it was a way of me regaining some control. But I just wanted to think for a few minutes about change a little bit because change is generally something that's quite threatening. And when you kind of get into that, we regard change as a threatening thing because it's hardwired into us that change is threatening. And a lot of these kind of things go back to when we lived in a different world, really, sort of hundreds and thousands of years ago, where there was way more threat to your life on a daily basis. Animals and accidents and all these kinds of things. You had to worry about the saber-toothed tiger more than you did about whether you were going to get to work on time. So we're kind of hardwired to view change as a threat, and our minds will resist change. Will feel uncomfortable. It's that kind of feeling of, it's almost a bit like dissonance, but not quite. Like your brain just can't hold those opposing views at the same time. It can't think that change is a good idea when it's hardwired to feel threatened by it. So that's kind of why any kind of change we feel threatened by. And I did experience that as part of my journey as well. Initial thoughts of could I leave? And then there was all sorts of things that my mind was throwing up automatically. Well, you need to earn, and who's how are you going to kind of keep paying rent on the house you live in? How are you going to keep paying for food? Just thinking about kind of essential things, a roof over the head, how to pay to kind of keep the house warm and lit, how to kind of keep food on the table, and especially ever since starting a family 7 years ago, those kind of feelings really intensify, where you just know that you have people who are dependent on you, and that really ramps up the pressure. But actually, when you take a bit of a step back and think about change, actually change is all around us. Um, the mere fact that we are here is because things change. So everything in this world is short-lived in the grander scheme of things. If you think about how long people have been roaming the planet for, then everything is pretty transient. So yeah, the mere fact that we're here is because things change, and if things didn't change, then we probably wouldn't be here. And there's I can't remember if it's a Stoic phrase or not, but it's about how one person can't put their foot on the same part of the riverbed twice because it's all about how time continues to pass and the river continues to flow, and actually that footprint you leave in the riverbed is almost instantly wiped away. Okay, so change is inevitable. Um, and that is kind of where acceptance comes into it a little bit. So accepting that actually change is a completely normal thing rather than a threatening thing is a really important concept to grasp. And then I think it's about, it's about measuring it against your own individual circumstances at that point in time. So actually, if I decided to, because at one point I was, um, I still have aspirations at some point to, really try and kind of expand into doing more coaching professionally. But I knew that it wasn't necessarily realistic for me to be like, right, I'm going to leave my job, my kind of, I don't want to say comfortable job because it wasn't comfortable, but I want to leave my, sort of well-paid, steady job that I know I could probably continue doing for the foreseeable future to go off and start a coaching business. So yeah, you need to take your first steps on these journeys. Like I'm sure that if I went and I really ploughed all of my time into that, I could definitely do that. But I just felt like it wasn't a reasonable expectation of myself to be able to make that work within a short space of time. Um, and it wasn't a kind of rational decision then. I was really making decisions on the basis of the fact that, I so badly wanted out of the role I was in to put some boundaries in place. So I always measure these things against that yardstick. Is that a reasonable thing? Is it a rational thing? So it doesn't really have a name. We call it the reasonable rational quotient. Um, so whatever it is you're wanting to do, is it reasonable? Is it rational? And that's a really kind of simplistic way to kind of measure it. So actually, I kind of came to the point of, is it reasonable? Is it rational for me to decide to leave my job if I'm going to go and become locum and perhaps maybe do some coaching, around that. And actually, the sort of the scales fell in balance of that being a reasonable and rational thing. That yes, it will be a bit harder to kind of figure all of that out logistically. I'll have to make sure I'm planning ahead for shifts and all this kind of stuff. But actually, there always has been a huge requirement for locums, and particularly in the emergency medicine arena that I work in. There's always gaps, and I'm a senior experienced person there as well. So it would be reasonable to suspect that there would be a demand for my services. And I'm not someone to blow my own trumpet, but that is just kind of how it was. So measuring that against the reasonable rational quotient, I was like, you know, that actually makes sense. And then as it turned out, there was a job had come up in a kind of private business, essentially, recruiting that recruits healthcare professionals, and that was ultimately the direction I went down. And there was multiple reasons for that, which was again, it was the lure of the kind of steadier paycheck. It was the new challenge to use my skills in a way that I hadn't done before, and also it was a job that I had considered applying for a few times over the years, and I kind of thought, well, there's not going to be a better time to do that. And who knows? Depending on whether it works out or not, I may actually go back to the locum plan, which would give me a bit of flexibility because I do still have aspirations to try and work on the coaching side of things a little bit more. But yeah, that all kind of comes about because of embracing change, really. And I'm not advocating that people make like crazy decisions in their life and kind of do crazy things. That's why I think having that reasonable, rational thing in there can act as a bit of a barrier to stop you from doing things that are crazy. And I think my other thing would be if you're really not sure, like if you've got a bit of a track record of making crazy decisions, then I would tend to run that past someone who does not do that. So for me, that would be I would always talk to my other half about things because she's always a very if I say something to her, like the day I said to her, oh, she knew how I was feeling about work. But if I said to her, I'm thinking about leaving and becoming a locum, and she literally said, maybe you should. And that was the point where really I knew that, okay, yeah, this is definitely a reasonable thing to be thinking about. So yeah, you use the reasonable, rational thing as a kind of yardstick, and also just have that stake in the ground of someone that you know and trust to kind of as a sounding board, I guess. So yeah, change. Let's be less threatened by change. Let's know how we can figure out whether our decisions are reasonable and rational. See you next time.